Did you know one Mughal emperor kept a diary where he carefully noted down exactly how many cups of wine and doses of opium he had each day? Like a 17th century health tracker? Another one who spent hours every evening just staring at rubies and diamonds? And one more who, despite ruling the richest empire in the world, insisted on stitching little caps by hand and selling them for pocket money. Strange? That's only the beginning. Hey guys, dim the lights, get comfortable. Tonight, we're drifting through the strange daily routines of the Mughal emperors. No heavy dates, no memorization, just the quirks, the habits, and the little routines that made these rulers oddly human, sometimes endearing, sometimes bizarre. We all know about the Taj Mahal, the jewels, the grand palaces, but their hidden habits are the real bedtime stories. Let's begin. First up is Babur, the founder of the dynasty. You'd expect his days to be filled with military planning and empire building. But honestly, he spent more time writing about melons. His diary entries read like Yelp reviews. The melons today were excellent. Or, this city's governor was brave, but rather poor company. So yes, Babur was technically a conqueror, but spiritually, he was a 16th century food critic, and somehow, that worked. Then there's Akbar. He couldn't read a word, illiterate, but he adored books being read aloud. Every day, courtiers would sit and read to him for hours, and Akbar would interrupt with questions like, "Do elephants have souls?" And speaking of elephants, they were his true obsession. His daily routine wasn't complete until he had checked on them, fed them, and noted their moods. Imagine the most powerful ruler of his time, basically running a giant elephant fan club. Strange? Yes. Endearing? Also yes. But wait until you hear what his son did. Now, we float to Jahangir. He treated his own life like an experiment. Every day, without fail, he recorded exactly how many cups of wine he drank. Sometimes 20, sometimes 30. He also listed every single dose of opium. And yet, he had another, almost wholesome obsession: nature. He made court painters sketch every new flower, bird, or insect he came across. So you have this emperor who was both a cautionary tale about addiction and also the world's most dedicated nature blogger. That's quite the combination. Next is Shah Jahan. Yes, the Taj Mahal guy. You'd imagine him as a romantic poet mourning his wife, but his actual daily joy came from staring at gemstones. He would spend hours with trays of diamonds and rubies, just admiring them under the light, like a child with marbles, except these marbles could buy entire kingdoms. And then there was his obsession with order, checking carpets, making sure servants' outfits were perfect. Essentially, Shah Jahan ran his court the way some people manage a very demanding Airbnb listing. And then comes Aurangzeb, the complete opposite of his predecessors. No wine, no jewels. His daily habit was copying the Quran by hand, over and over. And in his spare time, he stitched prayer caps. Not for fun, he sold them. The Emperor of India, running what was basically a side hustle, just to prove he could earn his own living. It was part devotion, part discipline, and part sheer stubbornness. Part 2. The most strange daily habits of Mughal emperors. So far, we've drifted through melons, elephants, gemstones, and hand-stitched caps. But the Mughal world wasn't just emperors. Their queens, princes, and children had routines that were, let's say, memorable. Some were elegant, some downright bizarre, and some feel like the 17th century version of over-the-top Instagram influencers. Let's float a little deeper. Let's start with Nur Jahan, the famous wife of Jahangir. She wasn't just powerful, she basically ran the empire while Jahangir was busy tracking his wine cups. But her daily life? Oh, it was something else. Nur Jahan had a habit of designing her own perfumes and cosmetics. Every night, she experimented with new oils, herbs, and powders. Rosewater, saffron, crushed pearls. Yes, pearls. Imagine sprinkling ground-up jewelry on your face as part of your skincare routine. She also designed clothes, jewelry styles, and even new fabrics. So if Jahangir was the emperor of intoxication, Nur Jahan was the queen of DIY beauty hacks. Except hers involved diamonds instead of cucumbers. Now, let's slide over to the royal nursery. Mughal royal children were raised in an atmosphere of extreme luxury and equally extreme weirdness. For starters, their daily diet was less about nutrition and more about prestige. Sweets, rare fruits, rice soaked in milk, and honey. The idea of vegetables, practically non-existent. And surprise, most royal kids ended up sickly, chubby, and constantly in need of doctors. They also had a habit of being indulged in unusual hobbies. One young prince was known for spending hours training pet pigeons, another for collecting exotic birds and arguing with his tutors about whether parrots could talk to angels. Basically, the royal playroom was less like a school and more like a miniature zoo with philosophy debates thrown in. Among Shah Jahan's children, one stood out, Dara Shikoh. His daily routine was reading, endless reading. While his brothers practiced swordplay or politics, Dara sat with Sufi saints, Hindu scholars, Jesuit priests, even wandering yogis. His habit was to hold all-day conversations about spirituality, translating Sanskrit texts into Persian, and trying to connect every religion into one big philosophical stew. A noble project, a little dreamy, but for a Mughal prince, it was almost guaranteed disaster. Because in a dynasty where brothers usually fought with swords, Dara was trying to win with poetry. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well, but in his day-to-day life, he was basically the empire's book club president. The Mughal court itself had daily rhythms that feel a little surreal. One of the most popular pastimes, pigeon races. Courtiers trained pigeons to fly in formation, and every evening they'd release them, just to watch the patterns in the sky. The emperor himself often joined in, cheering for his favorite bird. Another obsession, gardens. Mughal rulers designed gardens with exact symmetry, fountains, and carefully arranged flowers. Strolling through these gardens wasn't just leisure, it was a daily performance. You had to walk, pause, admire the water, smell the roses, and pretend to be deeply philosophical about it. And then, of course, there was gossip. Every morning, servants brought in reports of who said what, who wore what, who looked at whom in the wrong way. In a sense, the Mughal court ran on gossip the way modern offices run on email. The queens, meanwhile, turned daily routines into pure theater. Baths were elaborate affairs, with rose petals, sandalwood, and attendants waving fans. Makeup wasn't just kohl around the eyes. It was crushed rubies for lip color, saffron for the skin, and sometimes even ground diamonds for that extra glow. They also had a curious habit of dyeing their hair with henna mixed with secret herbs. Some recipes included pomegranate rinds, indigo, and even powdered gold. It wasn't just beauty, it was chemistry, performed daily. So while emperors argued about religion or stared at elephants, the queens were turning their bathrooms into full laboratories. Part 3. The most strange daily habits of Mughal emperors. So far, we've met queens grinding pearls into perfume, princes holding philosophy marathons, and emperors keeping diaries of wine. But daily life in the Mughal world still has more curious corners, especially when it comes to food, sleep, and the little oddities that made royal life feel so far removed from the rest of humanity. Let's float further in. If there's one thing Mughals did not do in moderation, it was food. Their kitchens were gigantic operations, employing hundreds of cooks, tasters, and servers. And every emperor had his own eccentric eating habits. Take Jahangir again. He wasn't just drinking wine, he was also obsessed with rare fruits. Mangoes, grapes, melons. He once bragged about receiving crates of Kashmiri apples as if they were diplomatic treasures. And when he traveled, he actually brought gardeners along to transplant trees from one province to another, because heaven forbid he go a day without his favorite fruit. Akbar, meanwhile, leaned vegetarian most days. Strange for a Mughal emperor, but true. He avoided meat often, preferring rice, lentils, and vegetables. He even had a rule that meat could only be eaten a few days a week. Imagine being the ruler of half of India, with armies of hunters at your service, and saying, "No thanks, I'll have lentils." It was basically his version of clean eating. Now, sleeping in the Mughal court was an event all by itself. For one, emperors never really slept alone. Their chambers were surrounded by guards, attendants, sometimes even scribes waiting in case they suddenly wanted to dictate an order in the middle of the night. Privacy was not really a thing. Shah Jahan, the builder of the Taj Mahal, was famously restless at night. He often summoned musicians to lull him to sleep, with soft instruments playing in the background. Ironically, the man who built the world's most famous monument to love often found himself pacing around his palace, unable to rest. And then there was Aurangzeb. His nightly routine was the opposite. Extremely simple. He slept on plain bedding, sometimes just a thin mattress on the floor. He didn't indulge in perfumes or musicians. Instead, he read the Quran until he drifted off. For the richest emperor of his era, his bedroom looked closer to a monk's cell. Emperors also had unusual tastes in pets. Of course, there were the expected hunting cheetahs and elephants. But there were also monkeys, exotic birds, and in one case, even a pet crane that was treated like a family member. Akbar especially loved animals. His court was practically a menagerie. Every day, attendants brought in animals from far corners of the empire: tigers, deer, peacocks, parrots, and camels. He once kept an entire stable of cheetahs trained for hunting, each with its own handler. Imagine trying to run a government while also managing a small zoo. And Jahangir, he had artists paint his favorite animals in great detail. His daily routine included inspecting these paintings and comparing them to the actual animals, like a 17th century version of checking Instagram filters. Daily life also meant endless performances. Storytellers, acrobats, dancers, and musicians rotated through the court like living Netflix shows. Every evening, something new. Fire dancers one day, poets the next, maybe even a mock battle staged in the courtyard. But the real obsession was elephant fights. Yes, actual elephants pushed to battle as royal entertainment. Courtiers gathered, wagers were made, and the emperor himself watched with fascination. Today, it feels brutal, but in the Mughal court, this was prime-time TV. Meanwhile, poets recited verses so flowery that even the most patient attendants probably drifted into daydreams. But to a Mughal emperor, poetry wasn't optional. It was part of the daily cultural diet. Like spinach, you couldn't escape. Every emperor also had a strong streak of ritual in daily life. Babur, the dynasty's founder, prayed regularly but also carried talismans. Akbar went further, inventing his own religious practices. His daily habit included sun worship at dawn, bowing to the rising light. Jahangir, he sprinkled holy water on his food, and sometimes had astrologers choose the exact minute to eat, because apparently bad timing could spoil dinner. Shah Jahan, for all his love of symmetry, relied on lucky jewels and omens. Aurangzeb kept things starkly simple, beginning and ending every day with Quran recitation. So, depending on the emperor, a normal morning might start with a sunrise ritual, a quick reading from a holy book, or an astrologer mumbling over your plate of mangoes. Part 4. The most strange daily habits of Mughal emperors. We've already seen emperors hoarding melons, queens bathing in crushed rubies, and princes turning bedtime into philosophy hour. But the Mughal world still has a few more secrets tucked into its daily routine. Some are medical, some are personal, and some are so strange they feel like the empire's version of a late-night diary entry. Let's wander a little further. Royal health was always a daily obsession, and not surprisingly, Mughal emperors had habits that today would raise an eyebrow or two. For example, many emperors started their mornings with a handful of pills. These weren't exactly vitamins. They were mixtures of crushed pearls, herbs, opium, saffron, sometimes even bits of gold. The idea was that swallowing precious stones would strengthen the body. In reality, probably not the best digestive choice. Jahangir was especially fond of opium pills. He carefully recorded in his memoirs how many doses he took, as if this was perfectly ordinary. For him, it was part of winding down in the evening, a nightly ritual, like someone else might sip chamomile tea. Bloodletting was also common. Doctors believed draining a little blood every so often balanced the body. Imagine the most powerful men in the world scheduling their day around leeches. Not exactly the glamorous image they preferred to project. Another odd routine: obsessive note-taking. Several emperors kept daily journals, writing down everything from the weather to what they ate. Jahangir, as we've seen, was meticulous, recording not only his wine intake, but also how many pigeons were flying, which flowers were blooming, and which courtier annoyed him that day. Aurangzeb, despite his austere style, also kept daily records, but his were about legal matters, religious rulings, and how much time he spent copying out Quranic verses. So while most people ended their day with a bit of rest, Mughal emperors often closed it by scribbling down little details, as if their private lives were mini history books in the making. One of the strangest contrasts in Mughal daily life was Aurangzeb's devotion to handicrafts. Despite sitting on mountains of wealth, he insisted on making money by stitching caps and copying manuscripts. He actually sold them anonymously, of course, and the income went toward his simple lifestyle. It became such a daily routine that attendants would see him bent over fabric, threading needle through cloth. Imagine the emperor of half of Asia hunched over like someone's quiet grandfather, sewing caps by lamplight. If Netflix existed in his day, he'd probably have been a binge-watching knitter. The real pattern in Mughal habits was contrast. One emperor drank until he couldn't stand. Another avoided wine altogether and spent nights in prayer. One emperor stuffed himself with sweets, while another fasted for weeks. Akbar built giant kitchens to feed thousands daily, while Aurangzeb scolded people for wasting too much on food. Jahangir turned daily life into an endless diary of indulgence, while Dara Shikoh turned his into a philosophy seminar. It's as if the empire was less a single dynasty and more a pendulum, swinging between excess and austerity, day after day, emperor after emperor, personal quirks and superstitions. And then there were the personal quirks. Some emperors refused to see certain people on unlucky days. Some refused to wear particular colors. One had a daily ritual of inspecting jewels under lamplight, convinced that gems whispered omens if you looked closely enough. Nur Jahan supposedly tested her perfumes every evening by releasing doves, watching how they reacted to the scent. Shah Jahan sometimes demanded mirrors be arranged just right in his chambers, so candlelight would reflect in perfect symmetry. These weren't one-time eccentricities. They were habits, daily rhythms that gave shape to their strange, glittering world. So, when you put it all together, the Mughal emperor's daily habits were a kaleidoscope of contradictions. Diamonds crushed into beauty paste, mangoes treated like treasures, sleepless nights, endless gardens, elephant battles, sewing caps, bloodletting, pigeon races, opium diaries, whispered prayers, and perfumes drifting through rose petal baths. It's almost hypnotic, the repetition of routines, the extravagance pressed right against austerity, the grand palace rituals blending into little, private quirks. Strange? Absolutely. But in their strangeness, somehow very human. Because in the end, the Mughal emperors were just people trying to fill their days, some with luxuries, some with duties, some with obsessions. And now, you can drift off imagining their lives. A world of elephants in the courtyard, pearls in the medicine, musicians playing in the night, and emperors writing down one last note before sleep.